Currently serves as chair of the Department of English at Simpson College, where he teaches courses that focus on creative writing, literary theory, and you can hear me, can't you? And contemporary literature. He's written 4 books of poetry, 3 of them, Open Season, The Moment Forever, and Sablier 1, have been published, and Sablier 2 will be issued later this year by Korn Publishing. I've had the opportunity to see 1 and the sequel, and they're both as good as each other, so you can start anywhere. For those of you who don't speak French, Sablier actually means either hourglass or egg beater. David's poetry has appeared in many literary magazines and journals, and he currently is literary editor of Janus Head, a publication with a weighty subtitle, and here it is, Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature, Continental Philosophy, Phenomenological Psychology, and the Arts. You must be very busy, David. I first read David's poetry in the late 1990s when his debut collection of poems, Open Season, was published. And I've recently had the opportunity to read some of his most recent manuscript that will be included in the forthcoming volume. From my initial reading of David's work, I was taken by how he combined a lyrical seriousness with wit and play, and by his approach to taking ancient ideas from both Western and Eastern civilization, transforming them into contemporary counterparts, simultaneously retaining and changing the object's meaning. My request, David, is random gales, okay? Okay. In his more recent work, I see the playfulness getting more serious, and I think you'll see that today. And the poems often a denser, conflicting engagement with experience through a tension between statements and images of the natural world. David may have the distinction of being the only poet I know who, in his role as a moderator of a panel of distinguished poets, including Donald Hall, Robert Bly, Carolyn Kaiser, and C.K. Williams, had the last word, and in doing so, produced an unexpected, pleasurable moment for many in the audience. A highlight of the sorely missed Des Moines Poetry Festival was the panel session that engaged prominent American poets for 90 minutes of questions and answers. The discussions about prosody, the writing process, and the condition of contemporary American poetry. David asked probing questions as moderator, which created energetic exchanges. The final request he posed to the panelists was for each to identify an audience, an influence, and recite a few lines of this poet's work. Most participants brought us back to 19th century England, Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats. And when they were through, one panelist asked David to contribute. He responded by quoting a more contemporary, influential voice. Born and raised in Britain, one I wager you are familiar with, and someone who holds the distinguished lyrical title as Knight Bachelor for services to music. David proceeded, to the delight of many of us in the audience, to quote the following. I was born in a crossfire hurricane, and I howled at my mom in the driving rain. But it's all right now. In fact, it's a guess. But it's all right. I'm Jumpin' Jack Flash. It's a gas, gas, gas. Please join me in welcoming a wonderful poet and quality rocker, David Moore.
Thanks very much for that terrific introduction. It's not too late for me to solicit a blurb for this book since it's still in production. So. I remember that moment. It was interesting. Carolyn Kaiser just passed away a few weeks ago, so I was teaching a poem for this morning. Thank you, Jody. Thanks, everybody, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here at this event. I do have a history with Drake, having taught there as a visiting professor in the 90s. I was a faculty advisor for Periphery, so it's a pleasure to be here and to be back in the fold in that sense. Today I'm going to read selections from the forthcoming collection, Sablier, Part 2. I thought it would be out by now, but there have been some art-related, cover-related hold-ups. So anyway, I'll read 3 sections from it, and we'll proceed from there, I guess. Okay. So it's a long persona poem, and I think you should know that it is not me speaking per se, and so that the narrator, whose name is Sablier, which does mean hourglass, or actually a timer, so it's sort of like it's connected to the hourglass object. I would describe the speaker's consciousness as somewhat fragmented, deliberately disjunctive, musical, parodic, critical, lyrical, narrative at times, so it's a real mixed bag. In the second section, it's a little more focused on, I would say, music, than in the first section, in which that difference of registers is more noticed. But I'll start with the first section of the poem, called Geo, as it were. Amid salients, weeds, years, ghostly, sluggish, mobile as Caesar, bride parties, soft parties, parties of all countries, swatches of abstraction, insatiate misrecognitions. What does the age mean? What does the snow do? The grass is sour April green, moss pastel on the trunk of the snow-whipped elm, snow sketches the budding woods across the field. Sure, I'll be the outpost, the muted dog, remediable sprig, robin, slush, beaded robin, slush forth, all. The first section begins in the spring. It's not clear. Trim hour of fitful blooms, hiss of mid-May leaves, the future sharp, the past sharper. Lost takes a house just over the ridge. Sky gives the sky a stutter. Could I ever be patient as the moist rise of this evening's sweet spread earth? What we have to do with the stars, light stories, sun's flame floating down through June's blue-green spree, sleepy aloe, I'll believe in clarity's pitiless love. One day, sprung from the maw of possession, summer's dementia bogging down, bears watching autonomy's wince, font of hymns the familiar when truly felt, late dusk, glow of the white daisies as they gather, give back last light, applause of the stream. Listen now, shimmy, aspen, shimmy. Memory stencils its fair fixes, Saint Martin, San Martin. The lavender clouds clear and the giraffe in the fresco munches some leaves. Or is that a green crab dangling from his mouth? The sea, the real sea, releases the horizon. Beyond the russet tortoiselle, a lizard nodding on a palm frond. In screened, repellent haze, the eons pass through, settle you with some signs. Yesterday, a limed butterfly in white sand swall. Dusk-woven palomino swirls, singing back our names, the great oaks push. Turn off your dusty lamp and feel deft for a change. A steady wave of fortune flatters the hills, the air aglow. A worm, let it pass, and let's hold each other up to the light. Will it all to lean back in faithful song in a manner still as your garden blooming, various tints of treachery and Kemptus fear and candor flaring. The wind flowers, no, the wind clinches, the only future. Chevre foy, or one star's fading courtesies. The second section I will read is called The Objectivist in the Land of the Fauves, as in the Fauvist painters. And, this was written in France. I warned you against sleep in this hour's light and slept myself, a weathered green shutter swinging open to a violet glow. the cafe across the street, the chef arrives for work, kisses the waitress in camouflage hello. Zinc-tainted wine's closing beam of day. Cracked tile or spider, spider, another answer. The little girl on the beach this morning feeding pebbles to her doll. Pigeons huddled in the wind, eyeing Speech's damp sketch. Right before the dawn, once more the carriage is placed back of the horse, rousing some birds, then the squeaky wheels in my dream turned out to be that tree full of birds at dawn. Let the tune from the unknown cafe, the glance of your passing, scurry along noon's lit railing, this brief sky my province. From the balcony, a smattering of love below in the narrow streets, snatch of a cloud that seems to steam from the tiled rooftops. White gold of a commanding idea, blessedly you elude me, milliner to the air. Sly meadow, deep in the confines of the mind, blows to a firm blaze, gone bust. A broiled wave slips in, bands its own return, bubbles a summons to leap, all habit. Daft pine, the birds seem to love your beret, floodlit, gnarly self. Unfit for the banquet, go, it's time, forget again, this evening, all's demise. The little wind pushed open the broad door, the door let in the little wind. And through the swung pane, September's champagne light. Knives, forks, crosses clink behind me. I turn to see the dead bloom of war and the seeds pitch romancing like black ice. When you're just a polished mottled shell, longing for the air brushed by the fern. Sea wave in the dark, I forgot to say I heard you. Lucky you can't care. Oil and gold just reek of anger and doubt. Beauty disavows the empire. Rose nuzzling a green chili in the parade's passing shadow. Hey, and there's Mars, that prick of red starlight deepening in late summer's dusk. And finally, this is the last section of the book. It's in 6 parts. So, there's no spoiler alert issue here. It's not that kind of a book. It's called Time Coming Round, which is a phrase from, what's the Sinatra song about? September, what's it called? No, it's September. I'll think of it in a minute. Time Coming Round. One, go jester of a cloud, go ahead and laugh at all my old tethers. The long form of the world flutters, a fly's shadow against the lit weave of the blind, the blue in the bend of the nail, bullets ringing in another day. Better to be moved to say the high bridges of the world have never shaken hands. We'll all be disciplined as the wine's joy, tooling to the void, picked up some explanations, held some, tossed a bunch. I once spat abstraction, insensitive to the Lord's distress, but who knew? Just as a smile's gap can prove particulate, and up came the sun, and out came the red of the barn. 2. I intuit from the dream of the painting of the lost fountain, some snarl and sweetness in the water. Horror, conviviality, this was how we pearled, the colors that seemed to say. Dotting your way back from the past to dig a garden of fear, redemption, kissed fruit, flesh, aloft in the spirit of the real hour. Done and not done, like any season. The air is here, the leaf is there. The jewels are in the trash. Sure feels like we sweep to no end known. Ça va? Amen. 3. Found some late summer nonchalance and ended up the feather edge I just can't tell. The thermostat snaps its fingers. Indifference is just kindling. We've all got bundles. Mist over the morass, rustled interior. Mother to all ferment, my fancy leaps the folds free of cosmology's twinkling shtick. The jammed spur of bitterness and the goo of the real still. Who the hell from the playground next to the road? Stinky ginkgos. I remember waking in a fever charged to demystify. While the wrenched imperatives of the obfuscatory real seem so harmonious of late, so transparently embracive of mercy, air, love, Early autumn light, the leafless locust tree now, budding with stars. 4. No need to tell life's loose accord from hazes a shimmer showered through with rain's brief passing. Doesn't mean time's not here to say it again. Oh, dizzy rose, oh, dizzy, dizzy rose. A quick turn, like history might agree. Once a cracked stone, enclosure symbol, how long a cracked stone? Day may all grow close once more. 5. Time keeps fiddling with its initials, miry as much as wiry, down in the valley full of being and nothingness, some bees fly over. Were you seeking to refrain from singing time keeps altering its signature? Afloat there in your leafy river, buoyant liaison. The wind sounds vague as any dynasty I've ever known. Harvest moon, shine down through the drafty binaries. 6. Foggy ruins. That's ruins, Arumenians. Foggy ruins of pine, dead buck or bramble up ahead. A field weakened like the old hammock that holds only so many excuses. Love, willow, raindrift, love, let's fall. Remaining. Thank you.
So next up we have another poet to read for us. Her name is Sandy Longhorn, and she is visiting us from Arkansas, but is a native Iowan from Waterloo. And I had to practice the pronunciation of that because I always want to say Waterloo in the sort of ABBA style, but sadly it's Waterloo in the Iowa style. Right? She is very much an award-winning poet. So her first book, Blood Almanac, won the 2005 Anhinga Prize for Poetry. Her second, The Girlhood Book of Prairie Mints, was the winner of the Jakar Prize 2013 full-length book contest. And her third book, The Alchemy of My Moral Form, won the 2014 Louise Bogan Award and is forthcoming from Trio Press next year. And as I said, she is visiting us from Arkansas. She teaches at the Pulaski Technical College there, and she was being a very good teacher and grading papers today, which is more than I can say for this. Anyway, please welcome Sandy Longhorn.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, so all y'all who are students out there, just, be a little patient with your instructors right now. It's that time of the year when we start to go gray and pull our hair out as we're grading miles and miles of papers. Y'all hear me okay? All right. So it's fantastic to be in Iowa. So fantastic it decided to have temperatures plummet and snow for me. I'll be getting to go up and visit my family for an early Thanksgiving, and I appreciate Drake inviting me here for the poetry and the literature and getting to see some students who are involved in Periphery, which I just think is a fantastic journal, and the issue looks beautiful, and then what is contained within it is also beautiful. So kudos to you all for that. And also thanks to the Des Moines Public Library for hosting such a wonderful event. Megan has been a wonderful host and made sure that everything is flowing smoothly. It's a very intimidating microphone, just so everyone knows. Okay. So yeah, my first book, Blood Almanac, is largely my master's thesis. I did my MFA at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. That's how I wound up down south. And I just want to read a couple poems from that book because it is almost entirely about growing up in northeast Iowa. So it seems appropriate I would read a few of those. And the first one I'm going to read gives the book its title. Labor Day on the Bramer Blacktop. My grandparents' Buick is wide, rides smooth on this newly minted asphalt as we visit half-forgotten cemeteries near Nashua, Chickasaw, and Charles City, grass grown up in the ruts of tree-lined drives. Alongside the car, barn swallows swoop and skim ditches full of bursting cattails and milkweed pods, everything gone to seed at last, even the field on my grandfather's farm. 3 decades now out of our hands, out of the almanac in our blood. The alfalfa stalks brush the broad chest of an Appaloosa mare. Along her flank, my grandfather calls up the ghosts of his Clydesdale team, Dot, Beauty, Bird, and Spot. Everything capable grazes beneath a fleet of clouds. In the field's southwest corner, a granite boulder shoulders the horizon like a sack of feed, sun catching mica flints in the rock's grain, dazzling as any city skyline at dusk. I didn't start rewriting poems after undergrad until I'd lived in Boston and Denver for 3 years, and I kind of got a chip on my shoulder about what people from big urban population areas thought about rural Iowa. But they didn't really think about it at all, so I had to write the book to explain it to them, I guess. I also had to explain to them that Bramer Blacktop was not a type of blacktop, but the actual road to Bramer County from Blackhawk County, and, you know, they lost them there. I love them. And then, since it's getting cold out, the middle section of this book is 12 self-portraits, where I made an assignment to myself to write a self-portrait every month. I used to tell people the year that I wrote those, and I no longer do that, but it was during one solid year long, long ago. December. Too long alone again, and words clutter, hover behind my clenched teeth. My mouth no longer sure what slight adjustment equals speech. My tongue is the petal of a tulip touched by frost. My throat in the next year will belong to the hawk or the fat black garden snake lying dormant now in the crawl space under the house. Winter is made of this muteness and these windows, and the long view of white fields through icy glass where nothing moves and nothing raises its voice. So it's just a little sampling of the first book. After that was published, I discovered I remained obsessed with the Midwest, but I couldn't write about the Midwest, as I said, until I had left it and could look back at it and really absorb what it had made me, how I had been formed by it. But I got a little tired of writing autobiographical poems, so in the second book, you see still the Midwest there, but things branch out. One of the touchstone poems, one of the first poems I wrote for the second book, echoes back to Labor Day on the Bramer Blacktop. Having been begotten. The girl was born of the river and the black dirt, born of plow and drought-breaking rain. Her grandfather's fear came true on his death. The bone boxes of their kin are scattered as the wind scatters seeds, and no one drives the blacktops between cemeteries to place flowers alongside stone-chiseled names. All the miles he drove in his lifetime were for nothing. Her mother wades in creek water and transcribes the dream of her father's honeycombed bones. In the bank's soft mud, she whispers to the slick, quick minnows and the leeches until the sun breaches the horizon and slants through the thicket of bur oaks and spindly leaves. The girl has been known to gnaw on ditch lilies, the only food she's found to stop the hunger she drags with her, like an heirloom she didn't ask to bear. Some land is too wild to be claimed for the fields, for the burden of being asked to yield fruit and grain for the squalling young. From there, as soon as I said that poem in third person, the girl, it sort of opened up a window to begin to fictionalize more. And I was also reading the Grimm's fairy tales, Anyone out there read the Grimms in the as close to the original as you can get? The French translations of the German oral stories? Yeah, there's no Disney there. Cinderella's stepsisters chop off parts of their feet and bleed into the shoe trying to fit in, and people get danced to death in iron shoes. It's much more violent. And I wondered what would cautionary tales, that's what they originally were, look like in the Midwest without any influence from the old world. There's no Cinderella here. This is purely original tales. So I'll just read you a couple of those. Midwest nursery tales. In the stories, someone's always lost amid the corn stalks, crushed beneath a tractor's wheel, or swept away in a flooding season. Most nights, the children asked for the one about the girl who refused to mind, who followed a pair of moths into a field of alfalfa ready for the reaping. The girl trailed the papery wings through a maze of grass, ignoring her mother's high-pitched voice. Out of earshot, a fox appeared, chased her dizzy and nipped her heels until she fell. When the searchers arrived, all they found were her shoes and a patch of blood-red poppies. Each year those flowers bloomed, no matter how deeply they tilled the soil. And I know you're not supposed to have favorites. I can't help it. This is my favorite poem. Of mine, of course. Not my favorite poem ever. Cautionary tale for girls caught up in the machinery. Once there was a girl who dreamt each night of tools, the hammer's heft and the wrench's clamping jaws, her favorite pair of pliers, handles worn smooth from twisting taut the new-strung wire. She burned the roast, sewed uneven hems, but knew what needed tightening before her father spoke his soft commands. They worked as an efficient pair, and some days he forgot his lack of sons. But then she reached a certain age and the dreams began to change. Tools transformed to the teeth of rabid dogs, the flailing hooves of horses driven to crush her bones, anything wild and out for blood. Her mind gone soft from lack of sleep, she forgot to kill the tractor's engine and felt her sleeve brush the humming belt. In the span of one quick breath, she was pulled into the belly of that greasy beast. When her father came to find what took so long, there was nothing there. Nothing save a tractor with an engine seized and a scrap of cloth. Nothing to prove she hadn't simply wandered off. And then I think I'll just read two more from the upcoming book. But before I do that, I wanted to let you all in on a special offer. I co-edit a poetry journal called Heron Tree, and I've got some postcards up here that will tell you about that online journal. But one of my co-editors is a bookmaker, and that does not mean that she runs the numbers in Conway, Arkansas. She loves to make books, and I have with me copies of a single poem that she's turned into a book for me and 3 high bun that she has, and she won't allow me to charge for them. So, woo! If anybody's interested, come on up and choose one or the other, and I'd be happy to pass them on to you on her behalf. So, see that? Don't say I never gave you anything. Came to Drake and left you empty-handed. So the new book that Megan was mentioning, complete departure. You know how fiction writers talk about characters getting a hold of them and not letting go, and how the character drives the story, and they think it's going to go one way and the character takes it. Yeah, that happened to me with a persona. And so the next book is all persona poems from a woman I call the sickly speaker. She's a woman who falls ill with a fevered illness that resists diagnosis. The doctors can't figure it out. And she is either institutionalized or hospitalized. We're a little unsure at the beginning if she has any choice in the matter. And her voice got into me, and I wrote a couple poems and thought that would be it, and then suddenly I had a book-length collection. And I'm not going to spoil it and tell you how it turns out. You'll have to find out in April when the book comes out. These are the first couple of poems. The alchemy of my mortal form. I have hoarded my scars, kept accurate account of rashes, wounds, and spells of amnesia. The records state I am salt deficient and subject to a febrile habit. Each night of my lips split and peel. Today I am sin and ash. This muslin gown, electric, white, a garment more apt for entry into paradise. If confession be one part of the prescription, I do confess, I have transgressed. I left the woman I called mother the task of broom and dish rag. I made of my soul a harbor for ill will when asked to forgive. I beg you, my white coat, draw the curtain. The nurses may serve as our chorus of disregard. Their backs turned, their hands tending patients more likely to recover. Hurry, there is a panther in the undertow of this fever. Its claws are laced with radium, its jaw 2 racks of knives, thirsty for muscle and arterial blood. Do not trust the pulse. I wait for you to save me, to wield the burning scythe. You have to forgive me, I got a little tripped up there because I used the word soul. And at lunch we were talking about how I don't let my creative writing 1 students use the word soul in their poems. And I was like, oh, I did. Luckily they won't ever know. All right, so here's the last poem. Thank you all so much for coming out today to listen and share literature for such a worthy cause. The wine shows a blood sheen. Above this metal bed, there is a window. I arc and crane for a view of the boxed sky, the geese that burn an arrow pointing south. The mystics bring red wine each night with meals of seared meat, raw in the fleshy center. These succulents are meant to ease me into sleep. The blood they draw from my arm is kin to what I drink and eat. At night I sense the wolves, their paws threading through the trees. I do not fear their teeth. The prints they leave are the key. The white coats prescribe more medication meant to hold me here, fragile fool. I play the part, but listen for the geese, the heavy-breathing wolves. I know the number of days before the moon darkens. Thank you all so much.
Hi, I'm Maria Hansen. I'm the editor-in-chief for Periphery's 52nd publication. And today we have 3 students here to read their work from Periphery 51. So first we'll have Annie Salgado with her piece Captives. It's a fiction piece. And then we'll have Ishan Arora with his piece Wilting Ties. And then Britta Olmsted with her nonfiction piece, Midsummer. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Annie. I study writing among other things at Drake University, and I'm just going to let my piece speak for itself. So, this is Captives. Long ago, in a faraway land, there was a beautiful princess trapped in a tower. She had flaxen hair and rosy cheeks, and rather than attempt to escape, she passed the time reading about a beautiful princess from a faraway land with flaxen hair and rosy cheeks who was also trapped in a tower. What a coincidence, the first princess thought. Of course not, Your Highness, the audience said. But she was long ago and far away, and therefore the audience could not hear them. While the first princess was held by a rogue knight, the second was jealously guarded by a dragon. And while the second princess wished desperately for a knight to come slay the dragon, thus saving her, the first princess wished desperately for a dragon to come slay the knight, thus saving her. Each would have thought the other was a foolish girl if the second princess had been more than a character in a story and could develop opinions. As it was, however, only the first princess could opine about the foolishness of the second princess. Your Highness, you're missing the point, the audience said. But she was long ago and far away, and therefore could not hear them. So the audience appealed to the author, who sighed deeply and told the first princess's story to the second princess, who in turn agreed that the first princess was just as foolish. How very odd, the first princess thought upon reading the development of the second princess in her book. Not so, Your Highness, the audience said, and suddenly she was not nearly as long ago and far away as she once seemed. And so the audience again appealed to the author, who sighed deeply, shaking his head once again, and told the first princess's story to the dragon that in turn flew from one story to the next to devour the knight, freeing both princesses in the process. How peculiar, the first princess thought, and after a sidelong glance from the audience to the author, the second princess developed the same opinion. So, in a time not as long ago, but in a land just as far away, there was a newly freed princess who left her tower, and in it, a book about a newly freed princess. And at a time much closer to here now, the newly freed audience was finishing the story and walking away to roam their own lands.
How's everyone doing? I'm also a senior writing major at Drake. Can you hear me? This is a piece I wrote about a year ago. It's called Wisdom Tides, and it's taken from a larger piece, so I'm just gonna go for it. Watching the milk dissolve in a cup of coffee was one of life's simplest pleasures according to me. Finding such simple pleasures in life helped fill up a lot of his free time. And he had a lot of free time since he worked as a freelance website designer. It wasn't like he wasn't good enough. In fact, it was the opposite. He was among the best in his profession. His reasoning was that operating as a freelance website designer allowed him to work with a multitude of different companies with a very diverse range of projects to tackle. Best of all, working from home allowed him to spend time with his 1-year-old son Akhil and his teenage daughter Sam, who would spend most of her growing years without Dad around. Veer took a big sip of his coffee as he searched for something worthwhile to watch on TV. There was a big game played around that night, and he reasoned that he ought to get back to work for the time being. Just about then, he heard a car pulling up the driveway. Peeking outside and seeing that it was his wife Monica and his son Akhil, he went to the study in feigned ignorance. When he heard the key turn and the door shut, he waited for 5 minutes, then casually walked to the drawing room. "Hey, honey." He tried his best to sound a bit surprised. "I didn't know you guys were back home already." "Oh, is that so? What were you so busy doing?" His wife asked mockingly. "Work?" We could never tell when she was being sarcastic. "Right." His wife was enthused though. "Where's the little guy? He's sleeping. Please don't wake him up. I can't take care of 2 infants at the same time," she said without looking up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know what it means, don't you, Dad?" Poured herself a glass of wine. "No, I don't, and what's with the attitude? I was only trying to be nice. I'm tired, babe, and Mom's not doing so well. The doctors want someone to be with her at all times, and I don't want to be alone with the maid." She looked up at him. "And I'd be thrilled to come home and see my husband if that wasn't exactly what I did every moment of every waking hour." We didn't say anything. And after spending the entire day taking care of a sick mother and a 1-year-old, the least one would expect is to clean the house. "Look at the mess you made. You certainly made something for dinner." She waited for him to say something. "What's wrong with your mom?" was all he had. "Can't believe you sometimes, you know that. You're a child. I'll make something real quick. Just give me 10 minutes, that's all. Why don't you freshen up while I figure something out? Don't bother. I'll just order it," she said as she reached for her phone. She thought it was really sweet of him when he first decided on making the switch to work solely from home. She thought he'd take care of her while she was pregnant and look after their son in his early years, while being able to spend more time as a family. Besides, Monica never got along with her stepdaughter Sam, and could do with being around for what was a very stressful time for her. Seemed like a win-win situation for everyone back then. But now, "What do you want me to do, Monica?" he demanded. "I don't know. Maybe get a normal job with a normal schedule? Give your wife some room, maybe?" "Tell me something, dear. When was the last time you stepped outside?" He did not. "See? You see what I mean? You need to get out of this house. You need some fresh air. Take a shot all day, maybe." She made the suggestion with surprising awfulness. During dinner that night, though, she brought up the matter once more, hoping that something would give way and we would consider the suggestion one more time. This time, though, she tried a more gentle approach. "First time. Beats me, and I called maybe 6 times, but not a reply. He was looking at his phone trying to act busy, but his wife knew that this was his way of avoiding a serious conversation. Listen, I was serious about what I said earlier. Maybe you should seriously consider taking a short holiday. You can work from anywhere as it is. The way this is going right now, it doesn't work well. You taking a holiday might do both of us a world of good. That way my mom could move in for a few days. I feel more relaxed having both my mom and I in the same place. As for Sam, she can be here or at St. Now. It's not like she ever talks to me anyway, so that shouldn't be an issue. I'll leave the rest of you to decide for yourself. Breathe out for a moment before you say anything. So basically what you're saying is that the only way we can be together is for me to leave. Your decision, think about it. She made sure she said the food as she said this. She couldn't bear to see me anymore. The gardens of Victoria had a luscious green spot then that afternoon, a strange product of the monsoons. The grass was wet and finely trimmed, and the ancient banyan trees stood damp and tall and lovely. The sheer size of them provided the perfect shade in such a bright day. Hid behind the trees, slowly making its way west with the creeping sun, orange right then and hinting dusk. Crowds could be seen in the distance, with near the water sat two girls resting against two banyans in the shade. Last night was fun, said the dog that to Sam. She wore a red tank top and a most comfortable pair of shorts and was trying to tie her hair in a bun so as to avoid it from dangling in front of her eyes. Wouldn't you say so? Her friends I know wore a scarf around her face and tried to pick her on the question that was posed to her. She gave it a second before looking up. Sam snickered at her. Why are you still wearing that thing? You know I hate it. You know better than anyone that I'm not a fan of wearing my hijab, but it's so damn humid outside. Then I adjusted the thing, and then she adjusted it some more. After she was finally convinced, she realized, I should get going soon. Dad's going to get real mad if I miss my evening press for the third time in a week. You come on, give your God a rest, Sam interrupted. She was sure she would regret saying those words as soon as she adopted them, and she could see that Zen not would take them lightly either. You know I didn't mean it like that. Sam waited for a second before she spoke again. But she didn't answer my question, see? About last night. I had a great time, did you? You having a good time doesn't make it alright. Okay, Sam? Sam, Z shot back. Let's just not talk about this, please. Sam stood up upon hearing this. She had a commanding height, accentuated by her skinny frame. She put a cigarette in her mouth and patted her shorts absent-mindedly. Z handed her a lighter. Sam took it without saying a word and started fiddling with the phone, trying to look busy. Z wasn't fooled though. She knew that this was her best friend's way of dealing with heartache. Z sighed and then smiled at Sam. Okay, it was fun. Sam couldn't help but grin. But Sam, you know how it is. It's not about us. It's about them, and it's always going to be about them. What, fuck them? Sam shot back. She couldn't stop smiling, she was so happy. Yeah, but that's the thing, Z started. We can't just fuck them. Well, at least I know I can. We live in a culture that just won't tolerate it. And you know how close it was last night. I mean, found the underwear in my bed, you idiot. Z delivered those words as bravely as she possibly could, but they only made Sam want to laugh harder. Good thing I saved your ass. You mean you saved your ass, honey? Sam was quick to point out. Well, same difference. Z paused for a second after thought about it. Actually, no. Yeah, it's not the same thing. She tried to picture the expression of horror that would form on her mother's face if she ever learned the truth about her daughter's relationship with Sam. Okay, yeah, it's definitely not the same thing. Z cleared her throat and imitated her mother's voice. Hi. What did we ever do wrong in raising you, you ungrateful brat? What did we ever do wrong as parents that you had to bring a day's ribs this upon our family? Sleeping with a girl? A Hindu girl? Oh, the shame you brought us. What would the neighbors say? Z raised her hands imploringly. Hi Allah. Where did we ever go wrong as parents? Why couldn't you find yourself a nice Muslim? A nice boy? I knew Sam was bad for you ever since you were little. Tell me I wasn't wrong, now. Z couldn't hold her character anymore. She burst out laughing. Yeah, Sam was shaking. She felt so good. Once she got her breath, she said, "Then I need me a joint, you done?" Z waited for a few seconds, thinking, so catching her breath was unknown. She didn't smoke often. She was raised in a strict Muslim household in a neighborhood comprised solely, exclusively of Muslim families that strove to be the best Muslim they could possibly be. When Z was younger, she thought of her family simply being fueled with passion and faith towards their religion, nothing nothing more, nothing less. But she had not grown to realize that this passion was born and fanatical. She loved the Muslims as well, other Muslim friends as well, and their parents were nothing like her own. She constantly wished her parents were more progressive in their thinking, would come to realize that this would never happen. Sure, why not? She finally said it. It sounded long since said the birds quieted. The crowd dissipated, no soul was around the two of them. The only source of light came from one of those rusty old lampposts that were spread out all over the gardens. The only thing interrupting the stillness in the air, apart from the dripping of paper, was the distant sounds of Main Street, Calcutta. Sam lit a joint, took a puff, and passed it on. We're going to tell our parents someday, right, Z? Right. Z made sure not to look up at Sam as she said this. I don't think I can, Sam. What do you mean? I thought we decided we would soon after college. We did, I remember. But I can't tell. I'm sorry. There's a moment for our silence. I love you, Z. And I love you too, but that's all I can ever say to you. She still wouldn't look up. So where do we go from here? Sam was hoping, praying, Z would say something that would light a future for the two together. Z glanced at her, and then silently turned away. From here, it's all a matter of what ifs. We hold on to that image of what could have been, but it just wasn't meant to be. Z knew she had to tell Sam someday. I'm sorry, Sam. That's a pretty little speech. Sam couldn't help herself. She let her emotions flow. How long have you been practicing anyway? Z paused for a moment. I'm sorry, Sam. It's all I got. It took a long drive, but she made sure that she never looked up.
Hello, thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a sophomore English and journalism major. This is a piece I wrote last year in Megan Brown's class. It was really one of the first pieces I really wrote about myself, and it really forced me to reflect back on points in my childhood that I hadn't thought back to a lot. So I hope you enjoy it. It's called Midsummer. I'm just going to read part of it, not the whole thing. The old cottage creaks with each gust of the wind and light step taken in the night. Trees were chopped down over 500 years ago to carefully build the cottage, just 2 rooms large. It sits in a small clearing of the forest with a dozen or so other cottages in a circle, facing a shore. Cillian is what they call the lake, a million-year-old scar left by a meteorite crashing into the earth. Glaciers came and went, filling the crater with clear, fresh water, spreading over 100 square miles. Cillian stretches for a length of 25 miles toward the southeast and extends into 2 bays, the wide Rot to the northeast and the narrow Oster to the south at Lakesend. In comparison, the little cottages sitting at Cillian's lip are a recent phenomenon. They tell us that for a long time the cottage we're staying in is the home of the town's firemen before it was restored, along with the surrounding cottages to become a place for tourists like us to stay. The modern bunk beds look out of place against the old walls, the cold metal painted a harsh white to match the bedding. Mom sleeps in again, unsurprisingly. She's been doing that a lot recently. She wakes up in a panic, dashing around the room with a toothbrush sticking out of her mouth, getting dressed while scolding us for not waking up either. My sister, Allison, and I groggily climb out of bed, our hair looking like muskrat's nests, my grandma jokes from across the room. I'm reminded of just what day it is when I catch a glimpse of the curtains draped across the windows of the cottage, their print of a nighttime sky to trick our minds when it's time to go to sleep. Excitement bubbles in my empty stomach. This would be my first true midsummer celebration. I hastily pick out bright red cargo capris and an oversized sweatshirt, a great fashion choice for being only 8 years old. Allison matches me, only she wears blue. We always match, and we always complain about it, but we refuse to change. Allison and I would often stay at my grandparents' house, just 15 minutes outside of the city, whenever my parents couldn't get my older brother to look after us. They never liked the idea of hiring a babysitter outside of the family. Grandpa and Grandma owned just one TV, but they didn't let us use it, though we were far more interested in the massive bookcase that lined one of the walls in their basement. The top shelves displayed the souvenirs and artifacts they had collected over the years from their countless travels. hand-painted Matryoshka dolls from Russia, a fossilized ostrich egg from Kenya, and an ukiyo-e woodblock print from Japan of the couple embracing. On the lowest shelf sat all 22 volumes of the 1971 edition of the World Book Encyclopedia. We'd pore over the books while Grandpa sat in his big armchair, his thick glasses poised on the end of his nose as he read a novel. We'd interrupt him, showing him pages we liked, and ask him questions. Somehow, we'd always be brought back to the pages on Sweden, and we would beg him to tell us more, even if he told us the same stories 1,000 times before. We arrive in the large two-story building in the center of the circle of cottages, where the dining hall is. Everyone is already seated, their plates full with pancakes, toast, smoked elk, which I had tried but didn't really like, and other foods I failed to recognize. We quickly shuffle in and sit down at the empty end of one of the large wooden tables. The owner of the resort, an older woman with gray streaked hair, greets us warmly with a toothy smile before standing up. A hush sweeps over the hall, and she begins the blessing in Swedish, with Grandpa and the other native Swedes joining in. I recognize it, but hesitate to join, afraid I'll get the words wrong. I Jesu namn till vårt vigana, välsigne Gud den mat vi bär, och hagna med den milda hand, I närvaro hem och fosterland. As soon as I hear the amen, which thankfully is the same in Swedish, I leap up from the table to fill my plate. Each bite is delicious. My favorite is the lingonberry jam, a sweetly tart treat that always stains my tongue a vibrant red. I smear it over a warm piece of toast, hungry for more. I used to only get a brief taste of it at Christmas, but they offer it at every meal here. The noise in the room grows. People talk loudly and crack jokes as their bellies become full, the excitement tangible in anticipation for the day's events. Grandpa smiles at me from across the table, and I grin back, running around to his side and climbing up into his lap to cuddle against his familiar knit sweater. The story of Midsummer was our favorite. The way Grandpa spoke about it was almost dreamlike, like something out of a fairy tale. We would perch ourselves on his knees as he told us of a land located so far north on our world that the unforgiving darkness of winter reigned, and the daylight is merely glimpsed for months. We were entranced as he described the coming of spring and the lengthening of days as summer made its approach. He would tell us the history. He would tell us of how the contrast of Midsummer's Day, when the sun doesn't even fall below the horizon, was seen as a miracle to the people for as long as they had lived there, since the last of the great glaciers had melted. He would tell us of how it was a celebration of fertility, the start of summer, and the promise of new life. He would tell us of how, despite religious reformation and the coming and going of rulers, the bonfires, dancing, and drinking persisted throughout centuries. No matter how Sweden and its people changed, the ancient celebration remained.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Spalding-Cruzy, and I teach at Drake as well. And I have the distinction of having been the writing teacher of two of those three award winners. And I want the three of you to know how much I really enjoyed those three pieces. Captives I knew because the first draft was in my fiction class. And I love the ethnic stories that we just heard, those last two. They were absolutely lovely. Thank you very much, both of you. It's getting late, and I know attention spans tend to wane at this time of day, so I'll be quick, but I just have to tell you something. I had a conference with one of my students this afternoon, and I think it's fair to say we're the hardcore literature lovers right here today. And she's in my fiction writing class, but she is going off to medical school. And so she's tolerating the class, and she's a good writer and everything, but she doesn't aspire to become a writer herself. And she just discovered a piece of writing that for her was really meaningful. I had mentioned in an offhand comment about the work of Oulipo, which some of you might know, which is a French institution of writing in a Dadaist fashion. And the founder of Oulipo was a man named Robert Desnos, who wrote an entire novel without using the letter E. So I had said this in an offhand comment. And my student comes in this afternoon, and she says, I want to show you something that I did. And she had written an entire 500-word story without using the letter E, which, try it. It's incredibly difficult. And she said she found it really, really satisfying because it forced her, as Oulipo does, it forced her to think creatively within sort of artificial constraints, and she found herself cutting and combining and thinking of great new words, and it just really supercharged her creativity. And she said for her it was like an equation. And you know, she's a medical student, so she could think along those lines. And I was so fascinated by that. So I just wanted you to know that we writing teachers, we have some impact. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Joshua Dolezal. I first met Joshua as a fellow teacher. We had met at Central College when we were both attending a gathering to learn how to use writing as a form of service in our classes. And then Josh and I became writing buddies, and we had a lot of wonderful conversations, many of them at Caribou Coffee over the years, when I was working on my novel and Josh was working on the book that he may very well read from today, He Might Be Off to Good Things. We talked about autism and Gertrude Stein and Willa Cather and parenting and spirituality and so forth. And I very much enjoyed those conversations. I miss them because Josh became a father, and so he's doing more important things now, like tending to his beautiful daughter, Lyndon. But I was happy to hear that his book came out from the University of Iowa Press recently, called Down from the Mountaintop, From Belief to Belonging, published this year, 2014. I read much of that book when it was in manuscript form, and am very pleased for him at his recent success with it. I'm very glad to have him here today. Josh is a self-described erstwhile wilderness ranger, a campfire guitarist, and an associate professor of English at Central College, where he teaches creative writing, American literature, and sustainability. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing either new work or from his wonderful collection, Down from the Mountaintop. So please help me welcome Josh.
Well, thanks, Carol, for that great introduction, and to Drake, and also to the library for hosting this event, and to everyone for coming. I miss our writing workshops, too. Part of that is moving back to Pella. I lived there for some years before I met my wife in Des Moines. So, good conversations, and Carol is thanked in the acknowledgments for all of her insights in the manuscript. This is a book about belonging, and really begins with a sense of estrangement from the Pentecostal culture I grew up with in northwestern Montana, and the paradox of feeling closely connected to that landscape, but also not belonging within that subculture. And so I'm beginning, I'll just read an excerpt from the first chapter, which develops some of that tension, but also one of the earliest memories of belonging, which was on a baseball diamond. So timing isn't perfect with the World Series having been over for a couple of weeks, but this is called The Sweet Spot, and it's the first chapter. When I suited up for Little League at age 10, shrugging into a maroon nylon top and pulling on my gleaming white pants rimmed with elastic, I distinguished myself by carrying a wooden bat to the plate. It was a 32-inch worth cut from a blonde ash tree, and with its thick handle and barrel, it likely weighed at least 2 or 3 pounds. It was an odd choice for little diggers, since lightweight metal bats had more pop and far more durability. But I was a purist. Wood was what the pros used, the kind of bat that met the ball with a gut-tingling crack, unlike the ping of aluminum, which sounded more like a sound effect in a video game than a good, honest hit. I knew my bat could break, and every time I caught a pitch off the tip or close to the handle, the vibration stung my hands. But when I found the sweet spot, when a pitch came in at belt level and I got good wood on it, the shock washed over my body like I jumped into a lake. I needed that feeling for more reasons than I could express, and I gave it my whole attention, the way I forgot everything else while eating cherry cheesecake. It was a form of love, that sweet contact, like the bliss I'd seen on other people's faces in church, hands raised skyward, tears streaming down their upturned cheeks. And when I knew the ball would clear the fence, when I saw the pitch fly from the barrel and felt the echo in my chest and knew it was a form of truth. Baseball was my father's game, one of the few things we had in common, and the only exception he made to banning television from our home. Every fall when the World Series began, he borrowed an old black and white set from my grandfather, and we propped it on a chair in the living room where we fussed with the antennae until the grainy picture snapped into focus. It was there on the brown braided rug lying on my belly with my chin in my hands that I watched my team, the Mets, win the 1986 World Series. And 2 years later, on the same tiny screen, I saw Kirk Gibson hobble to the plate for the Dodgers, my father's team, and launch a game-winning home run against the Oakland Athletics despite a pulled hamstring and aching knees. For a few moments, as Gibson limped around the bases and we jumped on the dining room linoleum to high-five each other, dishes rattling in the cupboard, my father and I were one. He coached each of my teams from the Pee Wee League through Babe Ruth, managing even the All-Star squads, and every time I stepped to the plate, I could feel him watching from the third base coach's box, and I wanted to get that feeling back, knowing if I hit a line drive or a long ball, all my errors would be forgiven, and he'd give my shoulder a squeeze. There was no way for me to know when we first began playing catch on our lawn around my 4th birthday that my father was trying to recover something he'd lost. But in the next few years, as I started T-ball and he began grooming me for Little League, I knew he expected more than I could give. He often urged me to throw harder, frustrated by my noodle arm. But arm strength is one of the raw talents only nature bestows, so my earliest memories of catch are laced with a sense of struggle against my body, against myself. Our yard is a steep slope overlooking the Kootenai River Valley, west of Troy, Montana. An apple orchard and a vegetable garden flanked the lawn, an excellent sledding hill in winter, but a poor stand-in for a baseball diamond with its uneven footing. More often than not, I tripped over my own feet while trying to get under a pop fly that my father tossed overhead, losing my bearings while running uphill. The grounders he threw came at me like curveballs, angling down slope as they bounced my way. My errant throws, which increased the more he hollered for me to put some heart into it, usually landed in the bank of tall grass behind the raspberry canes. My father was not a patient man, and the longer it took to hunt for a lost ball, the sharper his return throw would be, upping the odds that I'd miss it on a short hop and have to chase it down the hill into the ditch where the birch and aspen trees fronted our country road. No matter how angry we'd get or how many minutes we wasted wading through the grass, we kept at it until dusk, calling it quits when the air began to pulse with crickets and we could no longer see. I know those marathon games of catch, though they often felt like failure, were my father's best attempts at love. I would later suit up for football and basketball and even dabble in tennis, but there was never any question that my first loyalty lay with my father's game. It was a gift he wanted to pass on, like his hope of heaven. And when I learned years later how my father came to faith as a young man, how he heard the voice of the Holy Spirit and began speaking in angelic tongues, I understood why oiling my glove and lifting my wooden bat from the closet always felt like more than a summer pastime. As a boy, I knew only that my father wanted me to believe in God the way he wanted me to throw straight and true, firing the ball toward his chest in a tight arc until it snapped in the pocket of his glove. It was something he demanded, a standard I strained to meet, and as far as I knew then, he'd always been clear-headed and firm. Schooled in the science of land surveying, he seemed more at home with a stack of maps and a calculator than the novels I curled up with under my mother's quilt. I struggled to reconcile my meticulous father, the man who triple-checked his calculations after packing his tripod around the perimeter of her property, with the man who could surrender control of his own tongue and speak in a stream of what sounded like gibberish to me. Our church was the kind with loud preaching and tambourines jingle-jangling through the worship service. We gathered in an abandoned four-service building on a hill overlooking Troy, a space we shared with the Catholic Church, which met early in the morning and dispersed an hour before we arrived to set up 100 metal folding chairs facing a piano and a screen where the words to our worship songs appeared, magnified and bathed in light. It was there I learned about revival meetings where a woman with the gift of tongues might speak in Chinese, not understanding a word coming out of her mouth, learning after the service that a man from the Sichuan province had heard God speaking directly to him in his native dialect and her voice. It was frightening to imagine the voice of God rumbling through my own vocal cords. It seemed like a superpower, a way for the body to feel proof of what the soul believed. I clapped and sang along with the others, waiting for the Spirit to take possession of me, but this seemed beyond my strength, like the games of catch in the backyard where I could never quite throw hard enough. The sermons at the Troy Christian Fellowship were much like my father's coaching, impatient with mediocrity, constantly calling me to higher living. One morning, the preacher worked himself into a sweat, pacing before us as if the church were a giant dugout, our buttocks clenched against the hard chairs. There was no stage, and he was not a tall man, but he seemed to tower above us. His text was the book of Exodus, where God delivers the Israelites from bondage in Egypt and calls Moses up Mount Sinai to receive the commandments the people are to live by. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," the preacher quoted from memory, his voice rising to a shout. "For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God." He stopped to let the words sink in, a vein bulging from his shiny forehead as he stared us down. He went on to tell how even as Moses stood on the mountain receiving the bedrock of Hebrew law directly from the mouth of God, the people grew impatient and melted their own earrings and made a golden calf, which they worshipped as their liberator. "Imagine," the preacher hissed, his voice fallen into a whisper. "Imagine yourself as a father who's brought up his child in the truth, only to watch him turn away, only to watch him destroy his life at the card table, or cast all his passion into gathering riches, or grow so proud with learning that he says, 'There is no God.'" The preacher clutched his Bible to his chest and crouched as if he'd caught a hard grounder in the groin. "You would not give up on that child," the preacher went on, his voice building once more, "because the love of a father is a jealous love, jealous for its own flesh and blood, the way God is jealous for his chosen ones, ready to let loose his wrath on them if they waver, and what they know is the truth." I looked at the faces around me on Sunday mornings, women weeping with what seemed to be joy, arms raised as they stood swaying to the music, men shouting amens to the other men who marched before us, possessed by the word and the spirit, and the great urgency of sharing the bad news of human nature and the good news of God's chastising rod. And I could not consider myself one of their number, even though I lived in fear for my soul. My father sang with his eyes closed, rocking in his cowboy boots with his hands cupped at his sides as if he were waiting for rain, and my mother pounded out chords on the chipped piano keys. I believed they had a grip on something real, a sensual spirit force that slipped through my fingers and left me feeling empty and cold as I sang the words on the gleaming screen, watching the tambourine player shake her whole body, breasts bobbing beneath her blue paisley dress. But when I wrapped my hands around the handle of my wooden bat and ripped a pitch into the outfield, the crack echoing down the barrel into my chest, it was like the voice of God in my throat, and my body and spirit flew together down the bass line. My father often said, perhaps to curb my pride, "You're only as good as your next at bat." I took this to heart. It was a literalism I was internalizing in church, a way of sorting the world into the clean and the unclean, trusting rituals of penance to make me whole. Like a prayer for forgiveness, which might wash away my sin for that instant, every trip to the plate was a mountaintop where I could not linger, an absolution pitching me back into the valley to climb out again. To my shame, I can scarcely remember my teammates, so intent I was on claiming the game as my one true gift, sitting alone in a packed dugout with my wooden bat at my side. Sometimes I held it at arm's length, studying the waves of the wood grain rippling beneath the blue Worth logo, then twisting the handle and closing one eye so I could track the straight lines of the side grain toward the sweet spot in the middle of the barrel, the place where I belonged, where I wanted to live my whole life. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really, I'm having a little Kansas City Royals moment. I'm sorry. I'm a Yankees fan, but yet. Anyway, so enough about me. Our final reader for this, now evening, I should say, is Amy Labrie, who is visiting us from the land of Chris Christie and Bruce Springsteen, New Jersey, but was actually born in Nebraska. So we do have a nice Midwestern thing happening. Amy and I met in graduate school where she got her MFA at Penn State University. I was there working on my MA at the time, and I remember thinking of Amy Labrie as one of the only people in graduate school with an excellent sense of humor. And thinking back on it, I hold hold to that, actually, very much so. So, Ms. Labrie, her collection of short stories, Wonderful Girl, won the Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Short Fiction in 2007 and was published by the University of North Texas Press and is highly recommended by me. But enough about me. She has also been published in Minnesota Review, Quarter After Eight, Iron Horse Literary Review, and Pleiades, the last of which nominated her story Ducklings for a pushcart prize. More recently, she won the Zoetrope All-Story Short Fiction Contest for a story called A Good Thing. Also, if you ever want to enjoy some very hilarious commentary on The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, especially the Iowa native bachelor, Chris Soules, Farboy Gun, yes. You should check out her blog, which is called But Call Me Betsy. So, without further ado, Amy Labrie reading from some new work, yes? New
Yes.
story in front of us, yes? Excellent.
And thanks for having me. I work at Rider University now on the admin side, so everyone's really boring and they won't talk about books and or The Bachelor. The story's about The Bachelor, actually. No, it's not. So thank you. I really love being here, and thank you to Carol for letting me come to your class. That was amazing. This story I've been revising all day long, so it's about as long as a haiku now. I keep cutting it shorter, and it's a work in progress. I'm going to try not to stumble as I move along. This is called Feral. 1 month after the end of my scintillating and stupid affair with a visiting and married professor, I discovered I was pregnant. The father, of course, was the married man, an Irish poet who disdained birth control, something about commandments. Rather than telling him about the pregnancy, I quit going to class and instead spent most of my time reading true crime books. The nastier the story, the better I liked it. I especially loved the ones where the victim escaped at the last second. She gnawed through the rope with her teeth, threw a vial of perfume in her captor's eyes, and then ran naked, wearing only flip-flops to safety. Take that, I thought, giddy with hormones. Hours evaporated while I hunched in the window seat of my apartment, turning the pages and devouring stale marshmallow peeps by the packetful. The books had titles like The Killer in Me and Dead Before Dawn, worlds away from the crap I was supposed to be reading for my master's in women's studies. These were not literary works. They were grisly tell-alls with dime-sized drops of blood splattered on the covers. They were mostly Midwestern tragedies that ended with descriptions of weeping mothers and jaw-clenched fathers. Stories where no one was saved and the bodies often stayed missing. I ate them up and went back for more. I lived in South Philly at the time, on a street littered with packs of beer cans and used condoms. The main sound effect at night were cars gunning and men yelling, "Fuck you, puta!" But the rent was just affordable on my stipend, so I ignored the groaning plumbing, the brown stains on the ceiling, and the moldy basement where parts of the wall pulled away when I brushed by, leaving dust on my sleeves. The feral cats multiplied in the backyards of that neighborhood. I saw 2 of them often. A huge orange tom and a small teenage-looking cat, also orange, with white spots, a cat a child would name Patches or Ginger. I gave her smelly tins of tuna, knowing it was a mistake, because then she would never leave. But one morning I was staring at a pile of dirty dishes in my sink. I glanced into the backyard and saw her move across the back patio wall with something dangling from her mouth. I thought at first it was a mouse or a baby squirrel she'd killed. Then I realized it was a newborn kitten. She went by with 3 more of them, hurrying as though late for an important meeting. Later that week, during a rainstorm, I skipped my evening class, Women's Bodies, the Skeletal Remains of Gender, to build a makeshift shelter out of discarded pieces of plywood that had turned up in the basement. I set the shelter up outside with no real hope that the cat would use it. After it got dark, I tiptoed out onto the patio and leaned down to look into the box. Yellow eyes glowed back at me. She hissed. I counted 4 small wiggling bodies and left her alone. The next night, After missing class again and failing to present my paper on Le Femme News in a glass darkly, I drank an entire bottle of silty red wine and called the married man on his cell phone, this semi-famous writer known for constructing poems having to do with the human anatomy. In bed, he liked to move his hands carefully over my skin, saying things like, "This is your patella, your clavicle, your cranium." "Something is wrong with me," I said to him, only slightly slurring. The line buzzed. In the background, I heard a roar of laughter and then what sounded like a cork popping. I recalled his wife, a thin, anemic violinist who couldn't have children of her own. I pictured him hulking around the lobby of the Walnut Street Theater, waiting for his wife to finish with the orchestra. He was a giant of a man with broad shoulders, a sloping nose, and dark hair that fell across his forehead in a boyish cowlick. He didn't like being tall, and so he was often hunched over as though perpetually ducking through doorways. In my bed, his feet dangled over the edge of the frame. After a moment, he said, "Are you ill, or are you just feeling down?" He sounded authoritative, fatherly, just as he had in the lecture he presented once, Crime and Horror in Elizabethan Poetry. I heard a woman in the background, her voice going up at the end of the sentence. I wondered if he'd found someone new, someone besides me and his wife. I hung up and ran to the bathroom to get sick in the toilet, observing myself from a distance, as a Pulp Fiction author might. The woman realized she'd made a mistake. Maybe a big one. My favorite story from that fall involved a woman held captive in a man's basement for 3 days without food or water. She knew that when he returned, the man would cut her into tiny pieces and feed her to his python. I forget how she knew this. Perhaps there were remains of other bodies in the basement. But when she heard him leave the house, she found a rusty saw and began working on her foot, which was chained to the wall. She kept fainting because of all the blood, but finally, she cut off 3 of her toes, and that was enough to break free and to hobble up the stairs to escape. It reminded me of the stories I'd heard from my grandpa, about how you couldn't keep a fox in a trap because it would eat off its own leg. Sometimes all that was left in the morning was a fluffy tail or the foot, and sometimes nothing at all. I called my friend Joanne, a former Texas beauty queen with not one sentimental bone in her body. She gave up pageants because she grew weary of the constant critique. "I know, my ass is flat," she said in her southern drawl. "I don't need a panel men to tell me that on a regular basis." Joanne showed up at my house the next day with thick garden gloves and a wire cage. The kittens hissed and spat when I picked them up, wild electric things. Above me, the mama cat paced back and forth across the top of the wall in distress. I imagined her leaping off, landing claws first onto my face. I could lose an eye, be made to wear a patch. She crouched low, meowing. The kittens responded with high-pitched, hysterical noises. Once we had them all in the cage, I leaned against the patio wall and sobbed. Joanne patted my back with 3 hard thwacks. She was the only one I told about the pregnancy. There, she said briskly. She reminded me that I didn't have to drink or smoke or overdose on cold medicine to change things. I explained to her that though I supported women's rights and even wore a pro-choice button on my denim jacket all through high school, I didn't want to be a person who had done it. Joanne touched my hand, uncharacteristically gentle. "Not all life is precious, honey," she said. "Think of Ava Braun." We farmed the kittens off to other graduate English students who gave them names like Yorick and Dante. I thought of keeping one, but then told myself no, I was not meant to be a nurturing thing. The mama cat kept showing up howling, searching for them, and I took the garden hose to her. The next week I made the appointment. The procedure took no time at all. 1 minute, I was flirting with the physician's assistant while lying flat on my back on a gurney, and the next, I woke up with a sheet over my legs. For 1 second, I worried that there had been a mistake. I would whisk back the covers and find my legs bloody stumps. A crazy hospital mix-up. Somewhere, someone had accidentally been given an abortion. Then Joanne appeared at my side. "You did awesome," she said, as if I had leaped over flames to rescue a family of 3. "Oh, it was nothing," I said, trying and failing to stand up. And I said a bunch of stuff. My mother called. She told me about the plumber who came to fix the kitchen sink and somehow managed to mess up the pipes so that a dark sludge was bubbling up into the tub. Where is it coming from? Her voice sounded frail, like that of an elderly shut-in. After my father died, she became an old lady overnight. He'd been a bully of a husband, but without him, she seemed rudderless, bumping blindly from one minor household problem to another. I can't take baths anymore, she bleated. You wouldn't believe the mess. I told her it would be okay. I watched the mama cat run across the wall in an orange streak as if her tail were on fire. I hung up the phone before my mom could ask me to visit. I borrowed a raccoon trap from a lady who made animal rescue her life's work. She lived in a row house filled with cats. The sharp ammonia smell of pee emanated from under her door. I worried that I might become her, a woman consumed with saving wild creatures. She said, "Did you know that a female cat can have 5 litters per year? Multiply that by the average of an outdoor cat, which is about 10 years, and that's 500 kittens. I'm not math whiz, I said, but that seems like a lot of goddamn cats. I thanked her for her time and hurried for the door, trampling on toys shaped like flattened rats. I caught the mama cat and had her fixed at a local vet for $20. When I let her go, she sprang from the cage and disappeared over the wall into the night. The next morning, she was back on my patio as if nothing had happened. When I tried to pet her, she scratched my hand, her claw snagging in my skin, drawing blood. A few years later, I read in the Inquirer that the poet would be giving a reading at a local bookstore. I put on my best black dress and high heels and sat in the back of the room. Afterwards, I waited till he finished signing books, and when the line died down, I approached him with my copy. Not a copy of the poems he'd written, but a copy of one of my favorite books from that time, a pulpy paperback called The Killer Among Us. I'm sorry about before, he said, moving his shoulders as if in such a way that it suggested that before was something that happened just back there in the other room, some small indiscretion as we'd accidentally stepped on my foot. I had your baby, you know, I said. He froze, his pen in midair. He's called Duncan, after your father. A boy with black curls. He has your eyes and my nose, some mild allergies, but nothing too serious. I kept talking, watching his face go from open-mouthed surprise to beet red, though I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment he felt or anger. If it had been a scene from one of the books I read, he would have throttled me in the parking lot and dumped my body in the dumpster behind the Acme. I continued lying and told him that our boy thought he was dead. I said you were hit by a bus, I explained. I made it a life lesson for him. Don't be like your father. Always look both ways. After that, I said goodbye and walked slowly from the room. A tickle went up my neck as if I could feel him right behind me, his hand reaching for me in hot pursuit. The only other time I saw him was later that same summer on a subway platform. At least I think it was him. Those broad shoulders and that dark ring of hair seemed unmistakable. I hid behind a large woman in a beige raincoat and made sure we stepped on separate cars. I could feel my heart beating in my chest like a wild animal. When I looked around the car, I was relieved to see that he'd vanished in the crowd of bodies, his once familiar shape indistinct from everyone else's. At the time I got rid of the thing, it was the size of a lentil, a fingernail. It's not like it could have survived on its own. I never even think about it. When I really can't sleep, it's the mama cat I see, pacing back and forth along the back wall, part of her ear missing. She's looking for her kittens, and though I can't explain to her that they're all perfectly fine, living it up in row homes instead of outside in the cold like that. She makes a horrible sound, a screech, as if someone has stuck her in the side with a sewing needle. Stop it, I want to tell her. It's over. They are never coming back.